Good evening, everyone. James Hancock here, back to review The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, a movie that director Terry Gilliam has been trying to bring to the screen for about 30 years. He came really close in the early 2000s with a doomed production that was covered extensively in the documentary Lost in La Mancha, but over the years, as various stars and producers came and went, the project earned a reputation as being cursed and one of the most notorious cases of development hell in movie history. The problems continue to this day with a nasty lawsuit with one of his producers, a lawsuit that's made it very difficult for the film even to get released. But when it comes to reviewing the movie, the question becomes, are we discussing Terry Gilliam's tireless devotion to this adaptation, one that's haunted him throughout so much of his career, or are we going to try and analyze the film objectively on its own merits? From what I've read of the film's troubled history, the narrative is as complex as a Russian novel. Orson Welles encountered similar difficulties as well with his own production, which he shot in bits and pieces for years until he was finally forced to throw in the towel, never officially finishing the movie. You might be asking, what is it about Don Quixote that attracts filmmakers like the call of the sirens to the point where they're willing to either to drown or be dashed against the rocks in order to answer the call? I must confess, I've never read the book. Miguel de Cervantes published part 1 of his epic way back in 1605 and part 2 in 1615. To put that in perspective, that's right around the time that the English were building their first permanent settlement in Jamestown. Shakespeare was still active in the world of theater. This book is old as hell, and this would horrify some of my old teachers from college, but I was assigned this book several times, both in my Spanish classes as well as in my world literature classes, but the illiterate dumbass that I was back in college could not be bothered. So my knowledge of the original material is limited to a few key scenes, but the story in a nutshell is about a nobleman who reads so many tales about knights in the age of chivalry that he goes completely insane and embarks upon a series of adventures with his trusty squire Sancho Panza at his side. Most of the threats he faces are all in his head, like the famous giant who's actually a windmill. Which leads us back to the subject of Terry Gilliam's latest movie. This flick is not a strict adaptation of the novel, but it does embrace much of the spirit of adventure in the original text. The story of the movie, The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, follows a filmmaker named Toby, played by Adam Driver, who's in Spain shooting a commercial incorporating ingredients of the Don Quixote story. The reason he was chosen for the gig is that he built his reputation 10 years ago by shooting a low-budget feature about Don Quixote where he employed non-actors instead of professionals. Toby's not particularly proud of the person he's become, nor does he like the shady Russian oligarchs who finance his work. And as a way of reconnecting with the young, idealistic filmmaker he used to be, he revisits the location of his first feature film, only to encounter the man that he originally cast as Don Quixote, a crazy old cobbler played by Jonathan Pryce. As a result of the original production, the cobbler has become completely lost inside the character of Don Quixote, and he believes Toby to be his trusty squire, Sancho Panza. Before Toby fully understands even what's happening, he's swept up in a series of crazy adventures where the lines between fantasy, reality, and dreams become increasingly blurry. So before I say anything about the film, I just want to reiterate how thrilled I am that Terry Gilliam finally finished this film. Terry Gilliam is going to be 79 years old later this year, and whenever he pushes on to filmmaker heaven, at least he will not have left his great passion project unfinished. I really have no way of knowing how closely this film approximates his original vision, but the film is complete and relatively available to be seen, so Gilliam can at least rest easy that he was finally victorious over all the various forces and obstacles and accidents that were working against him all these years. As far as the movie itself is concerned, there is plenty to praise, but also, sadly, plenty that left me cold. There are individual scenes scattered throughout the film that are some of the best work by Gilliam in many years. There's this beautiful battle with three giants that felt like something straight out of Time Bandits. Actress Joanna Ribeiro, she absolutely shines as the beautiful Angelica, a young actress whose life was more or less derailed by appearing in Toby's earlier movie. But my favorite scenes by far are of Toby as a young man, excited by all the limitless possibilities of a career in filmmaking. Adam Driver absolutely nails those scenes, but even more important, these scenes seem to capture Terry Gilliam's feelings about what the essence of filmmaking is all about. What trips me up about the movie is the uneven tone. Gilliam has always been fond of silliness in his movies, and when he's firing on all cylinders, that silliness is perfectly interwoven with the rest of the story. The problem here is that the silliness is almost never actually funny. More often than not, the silliness feels broad, ham-fisted, and occasionally tedious. Complicating things further is how these silly beats are scattered so liberally throughout the film that when the movie tries to slow down and deliver a dramatic beat, the movie lacks enough of a firm foundation for these scenes to play as intended. Moreover, the film's over-the-top portrayal of corrupt film financiers feels far too petulant and insidious for a director with as many credits as Gilliam has. These scenes almost feel like a childish attempt on his part to get revenge on all the producers that have become his enemy over the years, which might have worked in the context of a satire as blistering as Gilliam's masterpiece, Brazil, Brazil, but let's just say that this movie is no Brazil. So overall, I must admit that watching the film itself was ultimately an unsatisfying experience. I'm absolutely thrilled it got made, and I always like seeing my filmmaking heroes stay active into their advanced years. When I see directors like Martin Scorsese and George Miller and Alejandro Jodorowsky, Paul Verhoeven, Clint Eastwood, and Terry Gilliam still doing their best to bring stories they love to the screen, it puts a huge smile on my face. But it wounds me to be posting my first video about Gilliam only to criticize his work, so I do want to give a quick shout out to some of his career highlights for people who are new to his films. Both as a kid and as a young movie freak, I watched so many of his movies on repeat, but at the top of the list would have to be Monty Python and the Holy Grail, a film that Gilliam co-directed, in particular the animation sequences. And in my opinion, it is one of the funniest fucking movies ever made. But as a small child, I totally lost track of the number of times that I watched Time Bandits, easily one of the best fantasy adventure films of all time. And then there's his masterpiece, Brazil, a satirical science fiction film that gets a little bit better every time I watch it. It's a movie where the fantastic, the comedic, and the terrifying are all in perfect balance, and it's quite unlike any other movie ever made. It gets my highest possible recommendation. At any rate, it's my understanding that The Man Who Killed Don Quixote will go into wider release in a few weeks. If you're a Terry Gilliam fanatic, definitely check it out, but I'm not quite sure how it's going to play with folks who are just looking for a good movie-going experience and couldn't care less about the behind-the-scenes insanity that plagued this film. But for now, I think that's all I have to say on this particular movie. I still absolutely love and adore Terry Gilliam's movies. I just don't see this movie rearranging my top 5 favorite Terry Gilliam movies anytime soon. But if you enjoyed this reaction and review, please consider subscribing to my channel. I would really appreciate it. If you want to talk about Terry Gilliam movies, the best place to find me is on Twitter @Colbrax. But I can't thank you enough for watching my video. I appreciate the support, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.